Xin cảm ơn anh Bình về những lời rất là khích lệ đối với anh em công nghệ. Thì sau đây tôi sẽ giới thiệu cái keynote đầu tiên, cái phần thì chúng ta sẽ có một báo cáo viên, tức là ông ấy là Techday, là chuyên gia tư vấn cao cấp của Gartner ở khu vực châu Á Thái Bình Dương, và ông ấy cái mục chuyên môn của ông ấy là về security và data center, và ông cover về cloud. Thì trong buổi hôm nay thì ông cũng trình bày sâu về lĩnh vực, ông mà trình bày cái góc nhìn chung của Gartner về smart, về tiến bộ trong tương lai, cái xu thế. Thì rất là mong chúng ta tập trung ngồi, vì tôi sẽ không để phiên dịch, bởi vì by default thì mình phải biết tiếng Anh. Mọi người chỉ có nghe, chứ còn nếu ai có câu hỏi thì nếu mà hỏi tiếng Anh cũng được, nếu không hỏi tiếng Việt thì tôi sẽ dịch lại cho Chuyên hay đến. Ok, please.
Morning. Can you all hear me? Morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's an honor to be here among you today at this FPT event on SMAC, which is Social Mobile Analytics in Cloud. It's something that Gartner calls the nexus of forces, and it's something that I'm personally very passionate about. First of all, I just wanted to say a very heartfelt thank you to the FPT team for being so hospitable. I've just been in Vietnam for a day, and I've learned a lot about Vietnamese hospitality and culture, so I really appreciate you having me represent Gartner here. And the topic today is the nexus of forces, but before I start talking about that, I just wanted to tell you a little bit about Gartner itself and why we are in a position to view these macro trends in the industry from a very strategic and tactical perspective. So, Gartner has 1,300 analysts located in 85 countries. We take 250,000 inquiries every year from 60,000 individual clients, and we offer a whole range of advisory services that fall into different categories. These include strategic advisory, these include advisory which is focused on pure technical professionals, marketing, supply chain, so we actually cover the entire spectrum. And we started talking about the nexus of forces a few years ago, and I'll get into the specifics in a bit, but I just wanted to raise a few points that I heard in the opening addresses. Mr. Chairman, you mentioned that we are at the transition point of the digital industrial economy, and that's exactly what Gartner has been talking about in our symposia over the course of the last year, that we are at a significant inflection point where the traditional boundaries between IT and the business are blurring, and the role that IT needs to play in business transformation is evolving as well. And Mr. CTO, you and I were having a very interesting discussion last night over dinner about how organizations really need to understand what the nexus of forces means first, before they start getting into what is social, what is mobile, what is analytics, and what is cloud. So, what can the nexus of forces do? This is what I'm going to talk about initially, and then I'm going to offer you specific advice and recommendations on how you can implement some of these technologies. And I'm going to address you as an audience of technology users, because I know that you have some esteemed customers of FPT also in the audience, and all of you use technology as well. So what can the Nexus do? The Nexus can do three things. It can create broad new efficiencies in existing processes. It can help you to get more value from existing investments, and it can also create entirely new ways of doing business, or even create entirely new industries in itself. But how can we do this, right? So that's what my presentation is about today. So this presentation is divided into 3 parts. The first part, I'm going to talk about a few of the results from our Gartner CIO survey that we conduct annually. Then I'm going to touch upon how organizations, that is IT users, can identify areas to exploit the nexus. So that's the how part of it. And then I'm going to leave you with some specific examples and some specific recommendations on how you can go about doing that. So where are we today? And I think some of the opening statements by your chairman and your CTO very aptly addressed where enterprise IT finds itself at this point in time. So the first pillar you see is that of IT craftsmanship, which was the period until the year 2000. In this period, IT was viewed as something like a mad inventor, this black box which could create dramatically new efficiencies, which could deliver unexpected outcomes for IT, and which was innovative, but at the same time, it was neither a good communicator, nor was it viewed as dependable, nor was it viewed as aligned to the business. So up till the year 2000, IT organizations viewed the business as a hindrance or as an obstacle to creating a beautiful technical architecture. And the business viewed IT as something that was unreliable but marginally useful. Then in the year 2000 came the dot-com bust and the boom. And after that, there was an increasing realization that the old way of doing IT cannot continue. So we moved into the new millennium, where we had IT industrialization. So IT industrialization was the phase from 2000 to roughly a year or two ago, or maybe 2010. So here, a need was felt to standardize IT processes, to make them very process-driven. So you had frameworks like ITIL, COBIT, Prince2, etc. that really made enterprise IT more predictable, but at the cost of innovation. So enterprise IT stopped innovating, And if you look at most of the enterprise applications today, be they ERP or all of the other usual suspects, this mobile phone today has got a better user interface in terms of the applications than you find in enterprise IT. And this is changing. Gartner predicts that by 2017, which is 3 years from now, 1/4 of all large enterprises will have a specific initiative to make their enterprise applications mimic the usability of those that you find in consumer devices, such as phones and tablets. So there's a realization that it's changing. So that's what happened so far. The next phase, that was the bridge or the transition phase that we were talking about earlier, is digitalization. So the nexus of forces is the basic underlying philosophy or the architecture that enables digitalization. So nexus of forces is the how, but digitalization is the outcome or the what. So here you have social, mobile, analytics, cloud, you have Internet of Things, you have 3D printing, you have alternative payment currencies like Bitcoin, etc. So that's radically transforming both what IT can do and the expectations that the business has from IT. So, things are changing, right? We are entering the phase of digitalization, but what are enterprises actually spending on? So these are the results of our CIO survey that we conduct annually. This year's survey surveyed 2,400 CIOs worldwide, out of which 400 of them were in Asia Pacific, and roughly 70% of them are our clients. So and the rest of them are qualified CIOs. So this is not just a telephone survey that we conduct. We know who these people are and we know what they're actually implementing. So it's a mix between renovating the core, which is the older stuff, the legacy stuff that's still important, like infrastructure, ERP, networking, cloud, security. This is all important, right? But to the right, which is the green bars, you see the new stuff like BI, analytics, mobile, digitalization, digital marketing, etc. So it's clear that enterprises want a mix of everything. But if you look at how enterprises are actually looking to achieve digitalization, there are three essential ways that they're trying to do that. The first, and I'm going to talk about three specific points, right? The first is to create an effective digital leadership. And I was really impressed with what FPT is doing, because one of the ways that we recommend creating a powerful digital leadership is through events like these, where it's an internal event for all the technology-focused implementers in a company that actually come together and brainstorm. The other way is to implement hackathons, which you all know what they are, and also, reverse mentoring, which is sometimes folks at the middle level or at the entry level, they are more exposed to emerging technologies than somebody who's higher up. So reverse mentoring allows senior management officials to get the knowledge from some of the emerging trends as well. So that's the first thing, creating effective digital leadership. And I think this is a step in the right direction, an event like this. So I do congratulate FPT for that. The second thing is renovate the core. So all of these technologies that you see here, these are the ones that have already existed. But in order for the nexus of forces to be effectively implemented, you need to make sure that these are ready for the next phase of digitalization. And the third thing is create bimodal IT. Bimodal IT means there are two modes or two parallel tracks in which IT is moving. One is the usual stuff, the legacy stuff which is important, and the other is you create innovation teams that run in parallel but also reach into or also report into the same IT organization. So there's no conflict, because traditionally we've seen that innovation projects have been stifled at times by the folks in the IT organization who feel that things should be done in the older way. So you would imagine that all this cool stuff is happening, right? So IT budgets must be increasing. That's not really true. So our CIO survey again talks about IT budgets and their movements every year. So globally, IT budgets are flat. In Southeast Asia, they're increasing, which are good signs, of course. And what we actually find is that in Asia Pacific, more of the IT spend comes from outside of IT than in mature markets. So when you're designing applications or user interfaces, you need to also be aware that it may not necessarily be a tech person who's using the application, right? So I think it's important to keep this in context when you're thinking about implementing nexus of forces either internally or at your customers. This slide and the next slide are two of my favorites, because every time I present them, I always get strong reactions depending on who I'm talking to. So I look forward to your feedback. So our CIO survey reveals that 70% of organizations will change their vendors in the next 2 to 3 years. And in Southeast Asia, it's 87%. The reasons for that we can talk about in a bit, but if you look at the basic drivers for this change, you might say that price, service quality, flexibility, ability to partner, innovation, these have been the traditional drivers for change, right? Why does anyone change a vendor? Why does anyone change a sourcing partner? Because they don't like the cost, they don't like the service. But the key here is that it's the percentage of people who are looking to change. And most of these organizations state that they're looking at newer companies or newer ways of delivering technology like cloud, big data, mobility, digital agencies. So there is a strong demand from the enterprise segment to explore new avenues of technology partnerships. This is actually, out of the two, this is my more favorite slide than the previous one, because it talks about what enterprise CIOs evaluate or who they evaluate when they're looking at innovation. So the way to read this chart is the blue dot essentially represents what CIOs said they thought were the innovators in the last 10 years, and the yellow dot says who they think will innovate in the next 10 years. So while you might see Microsoft with a red arrow, it doesn't mean that people don't think Microsoft will innovate in the next 10 years. What it means is that less people think Microsoft will innovate than others. So Google, Amazon, and a lot of other companies, even folks like Facebook, who's not actually an IT company, they've been seen as being more and more innovative. So now we've spoken about where we are, what CIOs are doing, and what are some of the purchasing criteria in terms of technology sourcing. So let's look at some practical or specific ways in which you can look at building a framework for the nexus of forces. So before that, how not to evaluate nexus impact, right? Nexus of forces is the convergence and mutual reinforcement of social, mobile, analytics and cloud. Ever too often, I get a client inquiry that says, hey, I want to do mobility, so I'm doing Nexus. That's not really true. Unless you exploit the interdependencies between the four forces, you will not be able to achieve those three benefits that we spoke about earlier. So, separate initiatives are not necessarily going to help. They might get you incremental value, but not the full value that you can exploit. An interesting way to look at it is, what are the interrelationships, right? So, mobile is the platform for social and for information. Information is the context for mobile and social, and so on. Another analogy to use, and we were talking about it over dinner last night, Mr. Form, is that the role of an IT organization can be viewed as that of an amplifier. What does an amplifier do? Amplifier takes a signal, increases the amplitude, broadcasts it to constituents, gets feedback, and improves the signal, right? That's what an amplifier does. So, if a CIO's IT organization is an amplifier, what is the signal that's going on? The signal is amplified by the use of mobile and the use of cloud, right? The target audience is the enterprise's customers. You know, folks like, let's talk about a manufacturing company. They have some products, so the users are the constituents. So the signal is broadcast. The feedback that comes in comes through social analytics, and that has some distortion about the company's message. For example, the feedback might be that your products are too expensive or the service quality is not good. When you resend the signal using mobile and cloud, you sort of remove that distortion factor and you improve the signal. That's one of the analogies that you can explore. So how do we actually analyze nexus potential? 3 steps. Inventory available assets. Don't necessarily go for something completely radical or completely new. Most organizations have a lot of data that they're using already, and they don't even know where that data sits and what that can do for them. Inventory available assets. Look for how you can multiply the effectiveness of those assets using the nexus of forces. And third is to identify gaps in the product, service or customer experience to make that more effective. And the examples that I have later, they use these 3 steps, so it'll be fairly easy to follow as well. So, when we talk about inventorying available assets, right, like I said, most organizations have a lot of information about locations, people, profile, opinions, etc., transactions, invoices, but they don't really know how they can interface all of these. For example, an enterprise might know information about your customers, but you know the location as well. So can you add the location information to the personal information and add increased value? And one of the things that IT departments do wrong is they view this requirement to store information as something that's an overhead or something that's cumbersome. Oh, I need to pay so many thousands of dollars to store in the data warehousing environment. Let's look at invoices. You know, companies have to store it, but can that invoice information represents information about buying patterns, information about discounting patterns, information about seasonal trends? So can those be combined and made available to your supply chain or your suppliers, for example, to make their sales strategies more effective. Look for multipliers. So use one asset to multiply the effectiveness of another. So you may have demand for data analytics, but cloud is a way to store that data, and mobile is a way to get to either collect data or to visualize it, or for data simulation or other implementations. So essentially, you need to be able to multiply the effects of the three forces. And I'll give you an example. And I think most of my presentation, Mr. Fong, I delivered at the dinner last night because we spoke about this as well. There's a company called John West, which is a canned fish supplier. So they supply tuna in small tins. So they were facing a lot of backlash on social media, saying that your fishing practices are unsustainable and they're damaging to the ecology and the ecosystem. So they developed an application that allows you to scan the barcode on a tuna can, and you get the entire history of the fish, where it was caught, what are the size of the catch, what fishing practices were implemented, was the fishing done in an approved zone or not, and so on. That's an example of a very simple implementation that can deliver a lot of value, and it resulted in increased customer engagement. Before that, Greenpeace was giving them a very hard time, but after that, things sort of smoothened out. This is one of the examples. So identify gaps. Often, when you apply multipliers to the forces, you find that you don't even know what applications that can have. So there are unseen implementations of that convergence that you can evaluate. And I'll talk about specific examples as well. So that's the end of the second section, and now we'll talk about some examples quickly. So, the first, KLM, which is a Dutch airline, has a fantastic approach to the nexus of forces. This is just one of the implementations that they've done. So, those of you that have planned vacations with your school friends or college friends, it can be a big pain, right? There's 6 of you who want to go. One of them says, no, I have to go for a wedding in February, so I can't make it. The other one said, I can't make it for some other reason. So it becomes so cumbersome. So how could they make that an interesting exercise for people? So the assets that they had were booking data, traffic information and stuff like that on the website from their travel partners. Multipliers, they asked their users to register and provide them friend information or suggestions. And it allowed them to fill some gaps, which is book trips with friends, create ease of group trips. And KLM actually has some really interesting other examples as well. Like they allow you to tag your seat booking to social media, so you can actually select who you're sitting next to, and you get to know the person before you board the plane. They asked for participation from their customers in a social media campaign where people had to send pictures and participate in a competition. Once that competition was over, they took all the pictures, made a collage, and they plastered the inside of the plane with the collage. So that the objective was to drive customer engagement. That was a simple mandate. So that's one example. The second, imagine a field service company. This is a real example, but we are not supposed to disclose the name of the company for confidentiality reasons, so we respect that. So imagine a company that provides electrical repair services for all appliances in a particular city, right? They have a whole bunch of technicians. One of the technicians goes to a house and he says, hey, this particular board is not working. In the old way of doing things, he would have gone back to his office and come back 2 days later. But this company has provided them a mobile smartphone with an app that allows them to collaborate with other technicians. So they're able to post a query or call their nearby technician colleagues and find out, what do I do? How do I solve this particular problem? And it can be used for other things like rescheduling, for example. So often repairman comes to your house at 3 in the afternoon, expects to get done by 3:30, but actually takes 3 hours to finish the job. What about the next customer? So you're able to dynamically update their job sheet so that somebody else can take the job. So that's the efficiency delivered. 30% of traffic in Los Angeles, and you have a smart city initiative in Vietnam, so this might be interesting to you. 30% of traffic actually consists of people looking for parking spaces. So, I mean, and we have somebody from the US here, so I think that message resonates well. But look at it this way. You have this particular area of the city where there's a lot of congestion. At 6:30 p.m., okay, on one side of the street is a movie theater, and the other side is an office, right? At 6 p.m. the offices close and their parking lots are empty. At 6:30 p.m. people come to watch a movie. So using the wide area network that contains parking space sensors, meter monitors, inventories, can you make it available to consumers and have parking space sharing? This is a simple concept, right? So the outcome was they were able to save a lot of fuel, provide better service to citizens, maximize government and operator revenue as well. So we need to also look at Nexify, your other projects. And I promise this is the only time I'm going to use the word Nexify in the presentation. But simple things like you're doing an ERP upgrade, either internally or for your customers. Look at how you can make that better. We actually predict that by 2018, 30% of all ERP applications would have moved to the cloud, what we call postmodern ERP. So can you add gamification to the ERP to nudge user behavior? Can you add personalized dashboards? Can you add information as a service? So it doesn't have to be necessarily something completely new. You can renovate the core and implement the Nexus at the same time as well. So I'll leave you with an action plan. We've already spoken about some of these things, but the way to read this talks about inventory available assets, first step. This talks about multipliers, and this talks about identifying gaps. So you need to itemize the non-obvious assets in your industry area. Look at what you already have, and look at how you can make that better first. Because if you choose something completely new, it can be done, but it adds complexity too. Next month, or you can call it next week if you want, identify potential groups. Try to see how you can multiply the impact of those forces, and eventually look at targets that can benefit from this convergence and multiplication. So that brings me to the formal close of the presentation, but there are a couple of slides that I wanted to highlight. We have a lot of research. For those of you that are able to access it, we have Nexus of Forces reports for healthcare, finance, smart cities, government, Internet of Things, the whole. I think we have several thousands of documents overall, a lot of them are around the Nexus as well. And we have case studies, such as this report actually talks about how KLM, again, there was a crisis in Europe during the Iceland volcano explosion, so how they use social media to tackle with that. And you can obviously visit the landing page at Gartner on the Nexus of Forces as well. I think I have gone slightly over time, so I do appreciate your patience in listening to me. I look forward to your questions during the panel discussion. So with that, I'll step off the stage and hand it over to the next speaker. Thank you very much.